What's going on, guys? Today we have an absolutely bizarre case here where I live in the UK. We're calling this one 50 Shades of F***ed Up. This one will really make you think about the structure of your house, particularly what's under your floorboards. And I'm starting the renovation in my house, so this is going to be lingering in my head as we change the floors. If you want to know why, stick around and let me introduce you to the kindly killer. As always, the video does contain disturbing content and it's not for the faint-hearted, so viewer discretion is advised. Before we start, if you're a fan of true crime, you're in luck because that's what I do all the time. So if that's what you're into, please subscribe to our channel because we upload every single day. Let's get into it. Born on November 23rd, 1945 in the small town of Fraserburgh in Scotland, Dennis Nilsen was the second of three children born to Scottish lady Betty Scott and Norwegian father Olaf Magnus Nilsen. It's fair to say that his parents' marriage was difficult, with his alcoholic father walking out on the family in 1948 when Nilsen was just 3 years old. As a result, his mother and his sisters went to live with his grandfather, who was a fisherman called Andrew White. Andrew quickly became Nilsen's idol, due to being the only male figure in his life to look up to. Nilsen was known as a shy and daring child. His first memories, according to him, are of his family outings in Scotland. He considered his granddad a hero and was incredibly close to him, even though he would frequently be absent in order to provide a living for the family. However, in 1951, when Nilsen was just 6 years old, his grandfather passed away from a heart attack while out fishing at the North Sea. Nilsen's mother mistakenly allowed him to view his grandfather's body when it was delivered to the family home for the burial, and she told him that he was sleeping and he had gone to a better place. The death of his grandfather and the opportunity to view his body both had a significant impact on Nilsen's personality, and rightly so. I mean, what 6-year-old wouldn't be absolutely traumatized seeing one of their loved ones dead? He withdrew into himself and would reject any attempts of affection from other adults. Despite the close relationship with Nilsen and his grandfather, it's worth mentioning that years later in 2021, Nilsen actually accused Andrew of being a paedophile. He said, "I vaguely remember the concrete slit-eyed pillbox where strange things had happened between my grandfather and me. It's a horrifying admission to make, but the only tactile contact I had in my early formative years was the painful and confusing, paradoxical embrace of a paedophile." Whilst it's worth saying, and of course you can never know either way, Nilsen went on to call his grandfather a great man, saying that the broad sweep of his 62 years is too great for this short narrative, but his mark upon me is undeniable. There is no other account of abuse, and the allegations are absolutely denied by the family and the authorities, but of course it's not to say that the abuse didn't take place. So do with that what you will. In 1954, Betty, his mother, remarried a local builder called Andrew Scott, a strict disciplinarian with a low tolerance for the introverted Nilsen. The pair went on to have 4 more children together, and Nilsen opted to stay out of the house as often as he could, sitting for hours at the beach looking out at the water. Nilsen almost drowned during one of these trips in 1955, where he got into a difficulty in the water. He initially panicked, but as he was nearing death, he calmed down and thought that his grandfather was coming to rescue him. His long dead grandfather, who in a state of delusion, he came very close to reuniting with. At this point, there were other kids witnessing the struggle, and eventually he was hauled out of the water. Nilsen wasn't hurt physically, but the experience had made him feel far worse mentally. He believed his grandfather abandoned him when he needed him the most. Obviously, his grandfather was dead and he couldn't have saved him, but the delusions that he was abandoned changed him. And when you hear what happened as a result of this abandonment, well, you will probably, no, scrap that, you will definitely wish that he stayed in the water. After the family moved to the inland town of Sturgeon, Nilsen and his stepfather's relationship appeared to have improved. At the start of puberty, Nilsen quickly recognised that he was gay. Despite knowing this, he pushed his feelings aside and acted out, assaulting his brother and his younger sister, who would publicly shame him. So it goes without saying that there was never any love lost between the Nilsen children. He would enlist in the Army Cadet Force at 14 and would later enroll in the Army in 1961 for a 9-year stint. He excelled in the military and trained as a chef. He kept his sexuality a secret whilst he was there. By this point, his mental health started to suffer and he started drinking. After one rather intoxicated drinking session, he woke up to discover himself in a German soldier's apartment. Although nothing happened, this encounter made Nilsen begin fantasizing about having sex with men who are either unconscious or dead. Now, that's what I call 50 Shades of f***ed up. When he was assigned to the more hostile Aden colony, his fantasies got far worse. He began masturbating in the mirror and he had tilted it so no one could see his face. He started thinking that he had two personalities, the dominating and the submissive. What an honour to have him serving in Her Majesty's forces. After serving for 11 years, Nilsen left the army in 1972 with the rank of corporal and the credentials of an army cook. He began police training after leaving the army in 1972, and during this time he developed a liking for visiting morgues and viewing autopsied bodies. He left the police force despite the benefits of his morbid preferences and worked as a recruiter, but still enjoyed looking at dead bodies on the weekend. I wonder what he told his colleagues he was up to. Anyway, in 1973, Nilsen had his first formal run-in with the law. Nilsen had met David Painter through his job, and it was alleged that Nilsen snapped images of him while he was asleep. Painter was so angry after the argument that he actually needed medical attention. Nilsen was taken in to be questioned about the incident, but was later let go without being charged. Nilsen also believed casual sex was soul-destroying and a vain pursuit for inner calm. He sought it out but remained unhappy. He really wanted a relationship but he couldn't make it work, so this continued for years until at the age of 25, he started his first long-term relationship with David Galichan. Together, they moved into a house at 195 Melrose Avenue. During the lease negotiations, Nilsen insisted on having a sole use of the home's backyard. The pair bought a dog together, a collie cross, for only £1 and named her Beep for the noise she made as a puppy. At best, Dennis Nilsen's relationship with David Galichan, his first committed boyfriend, was tense. Nilsen started verbally abusing David and neither one of them was sexually satisfied. I mean, the fact that David was breathing must have turned him off. After roughly a year and a half, David split up with Nilsen, who descended into loneliness and alcohol. Nilsen promptly went back for looking for love, or his twisted ideals of it, and began a number of relationships, none of which lasted longer than a few weeks. On December 30th, 1978, 13-year-old Stephen Holmes went into the Cricklewood Arms bar hoping to buy alcohol, where he met Dennis Nilsen. The pair quickly began chatting, and Nilsen bought the young boy a drink and invited him back to his home to continue the night together, which Holmes accepted. After leaving the bar, Nilsen and Holmes went back to 195 Melrose. The two shared drinks all night long until they went to sleep. The following day, Nilsen was the first to awaken. Later, he admitted that he had been afraid to wake him in case he had left me. Whether Holmes wanted it or not, he would have to stay with me over the new year. And so, in order to prevent yet another person he loved leaving, Nilsen strangled Holmes with a necktie whilst he slept before drowning the young teen in a bucket of water. That wasn't the end of the evil, unfortunately. Once dead, Nilsen masturbated over Holmes' corpse twice and then hid it under the floorboard of his home to rot. And rot it did. Years later, Nilsen would recount his disturbing revisit to the body. He said, "I eased him into his new bed under the floorboards. A week later, I wondered whether he had changed at all or started to decompose. I disinterred him and pulled the dirt-stained youth up onto the floor. His skin was very dirty. I stripped him myself naked and then carried him into the bathroom and washed his body. There was practically no discoloration and his skin was pale white. His limbs were more relaxed than when I had put him down there." Holmes stayed with Nilsen over the New Year, Easter and most of the summer until in August 1979 when Nilsen built a bonfire behind his home and burned the body. Nilsen made another attempt to attack not long after the fire. He unsuccessfully attempted to choke Andrew Ho, a student. Although Nilsen was questioned regarding the assault, police brought no charges as Ho made the decision to drop the case out of nervousness. Ho believed that if he pursued the charges, he might have spent 2 years in prison since he was an immigrant and, at 19, was younger than the legal gay consent age of 21. If police continued to look into Nilsen, it's likely this is where today's story would have ended. Nilsen did not let this close call stop him. A year after his first murder, and 2 months after the failed attack against Ho, Nilsen struck again. He met Kenneth Ockenden, a Canadian student visiting family in the UK, on December 3rd, 1979, in a bar. After chatting for a while, Nilsen offered to show Ockenden around London, taking him to Downing Street, Westminster Abbey and Trafalgar Square. After the tour, Nilsen invited him home for a few more drinks, and they stopped at a store to pick up some whiskey and rum. Once inside, Ockenden was listening to music and wearing headphones, and Nilsen came up behind him, seizing the cord and strangling the student to death. After killing him, Nilsen began to dispose of the body, listening to the same song Ockenden was listening to before he had died. Nilsen photographed the body with the Polaroid camera in various different positions, and the day after the murder he placed it in a plastic bag beneath the floorboards. He would occasionally take Ockenden's corpse back out of storage over the following few weeks. As he watched television, he would unwrap the corpse and sit it down on the couch next to him. And the depravity only continued. 5 months after the murder of Kenneth Ockenden, on May the 13th, 1980, Martin Duffy, a homeless 16-year-old, was invited to spend the night out with Nilsen after he had found him hitchhiking. Like he had killed Holmes, Nilsen strangled and drowned the boy in the kitchen before taking him to the bed and masturbating over his body, where it stayed for the next 2 days. After Duffy's corpse bloated, he was placed under the floorboards, joining Ockenden. Billy Sutherland, a 27-year-old prostitute, became his next victim in August 1980 after following Nilsen home one evening. He was also strangled, although Nilsen recounts not being able to remember what happened with Sunderland, just that he woke up the next day to find the 27-year-old dead in his bed next to him. Most definitely not the one to mourn, Nilsen was back at it again just a month later, but this time it appeared his unfortunate victim came to him. Malcolm Barlow, a 24-year-old orphan with learning disabilities, was found by Nilsen lingering outside his house, complaining of the weakness brought on by epilepsy. Nilsen took him inside and called for an ambulance. Malcolm returned to Nilsen's home the following day to thank him for his earlier help. He was welcomed inside and served dinner, drinking rum and coke. Being drunk, Malcolm passed out asleep on his couch. The presence annoyed Nilsen, who killed him by strangling him whilst he slept. I know the British are bad at saying goodbye, but why didn't he just try hitting his knees and saying right then, like the rest of them do? When there was no space under the floorboards due to the pile-up of other murder victims, Dennis decided to hide his body under the kitchen sink. Malcolm's body is thought to have been dismembered by Nilsen, who later burnt the pieces. I must mention that Nilsen had many more victims than the ones mentioned today, with countless men still yet to be identified. Nilsen preyed on the homeless, the unemployed and sex workers so sadly that there were no missing persons alert to many of these men, which allowed him to get away with the murders for as long as he did. By the time Malcolm Barlow was murdered, Nilsen was quickly running out of storage space, and the smell of rotting corpses was impossible to cover up. Once the bodies had begun to decompose, Nilsen would dissect them using the butchering techniques he learnt as an army cook, and he would then bury pieces beneath the floorboards. He would then throw the organs into an alley for foxes and birds to eat. While he was walking his pet dog Bleep, he once packed up guts into a shopping bag and carelessly dropped them on the sidewalk. So, with the mountain corpses, the disposal wasn't as neat as he had hoped, with the neighbours noticing and complaining the overpowering smell. Nilsen brought himself some time by saying that there were structural issues within the building causing it, but he knew that something more permanent would have had to happen. Behind his house, Nilsen built a huge bonfire, and just as he had done with Holmes, he put a car tyre on top of the fire to mask the stench of 6 burning bodies. 3 local kids came over to see the bonfire, but that didn't bother him. He was probably glad that they were there to see the funeral bonfire. After the flames had subsided, he used a rake to break all the recognisable bones. Following the mass burning, Nilsen had killed at least 4 additional individuals in the following year. They were welcomed back to Nilsen's house, slain, and then played with before being put away, just like the others. There didn't appear to be any reason to suspect Nilsen, and his rampage had no apparent end in sight until Nilsen's landlord ordered him to move out of the 195 Melrose in the middle of 1981 so it could be renovated. So, he staged another bonfire that day before he left to get rid of all the remaining corpses in the houses. A clean slate? A chance to move on? Of course not. Nilsen began renting an attic apartment at 23 Cranley Gardens. Although Nilsen's new residence was less suitable for his murderous activities, it didn't end his rampage. It merely gave him a pause while figuring out how he can make the apartment work. 6 months after the move, Nilsen brought John Howlett back to his apartment after they had a chance encounter in a bar in March 1982. Once inside, the pair watched a film together after some drinking. John climbed into Nilsen's bed, which apparently Nilsen didn't want. Nilsen told John to leave, and when he refused, Nilsen strangled John using a piece of loose upholstery strap he discovered on the armchair. It was a struggle, though a good one. John fought back hard and at one point came very close to escaping, hurting Nilsen in the process. However, Nilsen eventually overpowered him, striking him in the head. Believing he was dead, Nilsen went into the next room to plan how to dispose of the body. However, John made signs of life. Nilsen was forced to go back in, strangling him once again before pulling him into the bathroom to drown him. The 10-minute encounter finally came to an end and John died. Nilsen then dissected John's corpse, butchering his bones, boiling his flesh, and then flushing the remains down the toilet. Nilsen was spooked after this and went a few weeks injured from the struggle. Nilsen met 21-year-old drag performer Carl Stotter. They shared a drink before going to bed. He tried to choke Stotter, who awoke gasping for air, begging him to stop. Nilsen brought him into the bathroom and submerged him into a tub of water, attempting to drown him. After that, Stotter stopped fighting and sank. He was brought to the couch by Nilsen, who believed him to be dead. When Bleep saw Stotter, who was still alive, he leapt up onto the couch and started to lick his face. Nilsen then placed the boy in bed with him and then held him close until he became conscious. Nilsen explained to Stotter that the sleeping bag that had been covering him had pinched his throat in the zipper. Despite getting examined and realising the condition was compatible with severe strangling, Stotter attributed the incident to a bad dream.
I fell asleep and I woke up and he was strangling me, and I passed out after sort of thinking. I thought that I'd got caught up in the sleeping bag which he had warned me about, and I thought he was helping me out, but he wasn't. And anyway, I passed out from that, and I remember vaguely hearing water running and being carried, and I felt very cold, and I realised I was in the bath and he was trying to drown me.
He had genuinely agreed to meet Nilsen again, but he never showed up and never reported the strange encounter to the police. Nilsen's next victims were not so lucky. Graham Allen met Nilsen in late 1982 and was welcomed into his home, where the killer made him an omelette. Nilsen later remembers, "I noticed that he was just sitting there and suddenly appeared to be asleep or unconscious with a large piece of omelette hanging out of his mouth. At that point, he thought he had strangled him but didn't remember. He thought Allen may have choked on the omelette until he realised that choking on food does not leave crimson stains on a man's neck. After killing Allen, Nilsen kept his body in a bathtub for 3 days before dissecting him on the kitchen floor. Dennis Nilsen's 5-year reign of terror ended on January the 25th, 1983, when a 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair became his final victim. The pair met in Leicester Square and Nilsen drove Stephen back to his apartment where he drank and took drugs before passing out on a chair. When Nilsen walked up to Sinclair, he knelt down in front of him and said, "Oh Stephen, here I go again." The ritual Nilsen performed after killing Sinclair was far more extensive than usual. He dragged the corpse onto his bed after washing it and doused it with talcum powder from head to toe. Before getting into bed with the body, he set up 3 mirrors so he can see it from all directions. He kissed him on the forehead and said, "Good night, Stephen." He then dozed off next to the corpse for the duration of the night. After that, he then dissected the body the following day and placed the bits all over his apartment. He tried to flush the smaller bones, internal organs, and the flesh of all 3 victims he killed at his Cranley Gardens property down the toilet. But all things come to an end, of course. Flushed down flesh, internal organs and bones are ever so slightly worse than makeup wipes, and the clogged up toilets quickly became an issue for the residents at 23 Cranley Gardens. On February the 4th, 1983, Nilsen, emboldened, stupid, or just giving up, wrote a letter to the landlord to complain about the blocked drains, and the drain experts Dino Rod were called to the blockage just days later. The technician entered the outdoor manhole and, in the presence of tenants, including Nilsen, found rotting human remains, and the police were alerted. Nilsen was growing concerned about the possibility of being caught. According to reports, he jokingly said to a co-worker on the morning of February the 9th, 1983, "If I'm not in tomorrow, I'll either be ill, dead, or in jail." Well, he wasn't wrong, because on the evening of February the 9th, Detective Chief Inspector J arrived to meet Nilsen to let him know that they wanted to question him about the human remains that had been found in the drains. Nilsen calmly said that what they were looking for was hidden in bags throughout his apartment and included 2 decapitated heads and other larger body parts. So, as you can expect, he was promptly arrested. Once in custody, Nilsen was more than happy to share the details of the murder spree, admitting to killing 15 men in the past years, and even helped police gather evidence against him, including taking him to his former residence to point out specific disposal details.
The exciting part of the little conundrum was when I lifted the body, carried it. It was an expression of my power to lift and carry and have control. And the dangling element of limp limbs was an expression of his passivity.
Yes. So his
these
passivity...
2 opposite things. I mean, it was my power and his passivity. When I was, say, 2 or 3 bodies under the floorboards began to accumulate, that come the summer, it got hot, and I knew it would be a smell problem.
Yeah.
It was the innards, the soft parts of the body, the organs and stuff like that. So on a weekend, I would sort of pull out the floorboards, and I found it totally unpleasant, and I'd get blinding drunk, so I could face it, and start the dissection on the kitchen floor.
Nilsen was detained at Brixton Prison following the confession while awaiting trial. In order to help the prosecution, he wrote down his experiences in over 50 journals while he was there. He also drew sad doodles that showed how he treated some of his victims. He appeared to be conflicted about his fate, sometimes displaying a little bit of regret and worrying about how people viewed him. Shortly before his trial, he sacked his legal counsel, rehired him, and then fired him again. The first day of his trial was October 24th, 1983. Nilsen was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Nilsen entered a plea of not guilty based on the diminished responsibility. Basically, he was going to try and say he was insane to get out of this. In addition to the testimony of victims who managed to escape, the prosecution also heavily relied on the extensive interview notes that were taken after his arrest and took more than 4 hours to be read out loud to the jury. Photographs of the crime scene, the cutting board used to dissect the victims, the cooking pot used to boil the victims' heads, feet and hands were all served as physical proof. Dr. James McKeith and Patrick Galloway, 2 psychiatrists, provided the main source of evidence for the defence. Nilsen's difficult upbringing, inability to articulate his emotions, and the subsequent disassociation from mental to physical action which impacted his sense of self were all noted by McKeith. This showed a lack of accountability on Nilsen's side. However, McKeith was compelled to withdraw his statement of diminished blame after being subjected to a vigorous cross-examination by the prosecution. The second psychiatrist, Galloway, identified Nilsen as having a false self syndrome, which is characterized by schizoid outbursts that prevent him from premeditating. However, most of Galloway's testimony was highly technical, giving the judge a reason to doubt the complexity of Galloway's diagnosis. To refute some of the defense psychiatrist's testimony, the prosecution brought Dr. Paul Bowden, a psychiatrist who had spent a lot of time with Nilsen. He claimed that although specific indicators of mental illness and being deceptive, Nilsen was nevertheless aware and accountable for his actions. The majority of the confusing psychiatric terminology was dropped by the judge at the summing up when she told the jury that a mind could be evil without being abnormal. On November 3rd, 1983, the jury disbanded without reaching a consensus. The majority verdict was rendered on all 6 counts of murder the following day at 4:25 p.m. after the judge decided to accept it. Dennis Nilsen was given a life sentence in jail with a minimum 25-year parole requirement. 3 days after Dennis Nilsen was handed his life sentence, his final victim was also given one. Nilsen's beloved dog Bleep was put to sleep after authorities concluded that nobody would adopt a serial killer's dog, also because they couldn't rule out that the collie cross had ever eaten any of the victim's remains. Almost 35 years into his sentence, on May the 10th, 2018, Nilsen was transported from HMP Full Sutton to Yorkshire Hospital after complaining about excruciating stomach pains. He was discovered to have a severe stomach disease, which was treated, but due to the procedure, he also developed a blood clot and died just 2 years later. His remains were cremated a month later in a ceremony with a few mourners, mainly prison guards and no relatives. So, with 16 young men dead and countless others impacted by the life and crimes of Dennis Nilsen, would you have preferred him to die out at sea all those years ago? Let me know in the comments down below. That wraps up today's video. If you found that one interesting, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.